Good evening. I call the Assembly Committee of the Whole to order. It is November 4th at 6:01 p.m. Ms. Hall, would you read the land acknowledgement, please?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Smith. We would like to acknowledge that the City and Borough of Juneau is on Linkett land and wish to honor the Indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Gunas Chish.
Gunas Chish. Thank you, Ms. Hall. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maureen Hall. Here. Neil Steininger.
Here.
Ella Atkinson.
Here.
Paul Kelly.
Here.
Christine Wall, excuse me. It's the Hall
Rhymes
and Wall.
with Hall.
It's gonna get me every time.
Present.
Wall. Alicia Hughes Scandies.
Here.
Wade Bryson.
Present.
Mayor Weldon. Here. And Deputy Mayor Smith.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll note the agenda as approved. Any changes to the April 15, 2024 Assembly Cow draft minutes? Mayor Weldon.
I found a couple minor grammatical things that I'll pass on to the clerk, that's all.
Very good. With those minor grammatical things, we will note those minutes as approved. We have 6 items on the agenda tonight. Starting off, we are joined by a couple representatives from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to talk about HESCO barriers. Madam Manager, any introduction that we should do here? I stole the names, so if you need me to read the names of the gentlemen, I'm happy to do so, but anything else beyond that? Very good. We're joined by Philip Martinez and Dan Allard of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We also have Keith Anderson from the Flood Defense Group. My understanding he's a contractor of the Army Corps with a lot of experience with HESCO barriers. But without further ado, gentlemen, please start us off. Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Assembly, for inviting us to come speak. Once again, my name is Philip Martinez. I'm with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Alaska District in the Civil Works Division. And to my right is Dan Allard, also with the Alaska District in Emergency Management.
Mr. Martinez, pardon me one moment. If you would just move your mic a little closer to your mouth when you're speaking. Thank you.
And then also Keith Anderson with the Flood Defense Group, and I'll have him start off the presentation, talking about HESCO barriers.
We're working on getting Mr. Anderson over into panelist mode at the moment.
Madam Manager.
Deputy Mayor,
Mike.
maybe while we're waiting for Mr. Anderson to be pulled over, I just want to clarify that the purpose of this presentation from the Army Corps of Engineers is really to give you, the Assembly, an opportunity to answer questions about the Phase 1 flood fighting project, HESCO barriers, HESCO barrier installation, and just understand, some of the conversations that we have been having as we work on this project. So it's specific to that topic. And then at the November 18th meeting, I will be bringing you back more information about the local improvement district and how to pay for the project. So we're prepared today to speak about project details, and then we'll come back to you at the regular meeting with that more kind of financial information.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Manager.
And Mr. Anderson has joined us in panelist mode. You should be able to speak at this time without being muted, Mr. Anderson.
Okay, can you hear me right now?
We can. Thank you.
Okay, super. Is it possible? I'm trying to share my screen, but it says I can't share my screen because I believe it's already being shared. So I don't know if it's possible to unshare what I'm looking at it appears to be the core briefing. I don't know if I can exit out.
Right, is that what we're supposed to be doing right now, is the core
This
briefing?
is, but this is not the one. I got a different briefing. That was the one that I had sent a link over toward.
Oh, okay, we have both of them, this was the first one I thought we were doing, I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. Yeah, okay, perfect. And then as we go through it, do I just have to say next slide, or do I have the ability to go forward or backward?
Mr. Anderson, now that I've stopped sharing my screen, you're welcome to share the screen so you can.
Okay, perfect.
Like,
And Mr. Anderson, are you good for us to ask questions as you go?
Absolutely. So you're sharing my screen. All right, so everybody can see. Okay. Does everybody see a PowerPoint with like oops. Sorry, I missed it. I'm sorry, bear with me.
Oh.
All right. Can everybody, there's what I'm looking for. Can everybody see that screen? The introduction to HESCO Bastion?
Yes, we see that.
Okay, perfect. All right, so this is just, I was asked to come in here and just real quick provide some, basic information on HESCO, what it is, what it's capable of, what it does, some of the uses of it. And so I'm not going to I don't want to be too long-winded on it, so I'm going to kind of go quickly, but it's, just a quick introduction of myself. My name is Keith Anderson. I was the first employee of HESCO when they started here in the U.S. I worked for them for about 17 and a half years. I've built more HESCO than anyone HESCO is aware of. HESCO is the primary provider of flood defense barriers for the Corps of Engineers since at least 2005. I personally have started doing flood defense since 2004. I also spent about 6 years living in Afghanistan and another 5 years in rough terrain environments, with Iraq, Sudan, Lebanon, doing force protection blast walls with the same product. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of both, only as is pertinent to the specific capabilities of the product. So without further ado, I'm just going to get started here. You can see a picture here of a guy with a skid steer loading up a bunch of HESCO. And so basically HESCO, it's essentially just a bunch of pre-connected welded wire mesh panels to make individual boxes that are then lined with geotextile fabric that therefore allows you to fill it up with, dirt, sand, and locally available fill material. So this is just an example of the standard 4-foot tall HESCO being filled by the National Guard during an emergency in New Mexico for debris flows. And so here's an example here where this one's in Colorado. Also, we were doing for debris flows. This shows how you can stack the product. So in this case, underneath that train trestle there, it's 12 foot high of protection. And on the picture on the left, you can see how they're all modular boxes. And basically, we fill those and then you can start to stack subsequent levels on top. One of the neat things to comment, just as you're looking down at all of these boxes, is if you guys are ever worried about like debris impact or some catastrophic impact of something, the way that all of these boxes are individually lined with fabric and all connected together, it's nice because even if you had a catastrophic debris impact, it's only going to bust 1 or 2 boxes. And even then, that's never happened. But in a worst case scenario, it's nice because you can see how many boxes there are. And so there's never been a case of one box getting damaged, resulting in a bunch of them somehow failing. And so the modular design of that really lends itself to being able to deal with the debris impact and a variety of different threats. Simply put, this is how you do the product. It comes flat packed, which is great for Alaska because it's really expensive to ship stuff out there. And so, you can get upwards of a mile in a shipping container. And then you pull the units out, as you can see in step 2. Step 3, it's just like a helical coil for imagine like a spiral notebook, if you can imagine it that way, where you just mash the 2 coils together and you pin it with a joining rod, and then you fill it with dirt and you pack it down. And that's it. It's a super simple product. One of the ways I would suggest people to think of it, it's like a soil-filled Lego. And all of these individual boxes are essentially like little building blocks, like soil-filled building blocks. Here's an example. Okay, what is HESCO used for? There's a lot of civil engineering applications where, I mean, flood defense barriers and debris flow is predominantly what I'm doing. I would comment that the debris flow is heavier than normal flood water. And so, the fact that we can stop not only flood, but debris flows, which are more dangerous and hazardous, this is the primary product that's used to stop that, just because of how threatening that type of flooding is. But because it's like a soil filled Lego, it's also used for, erosion control or retaining walls. As far as military applications are concerned, 90% of all the U.S. military bases downrange are using this product as their perimeter wall. Generally they're about 12 feet tall, and they're meant to stop rockets, mortars, artillery, and specifically car bombs. And I'll talk a little bit about that here in just a second. But because of the bulk of these baskets, they can take, floodwater, debris impact, car bombs, rockets. It's amazing how strong they are. And so, again, using the soil-filled Lego thing, I've actually built schools and buildings and bunkers and containment berms. And it's a limit. You can do so many different things. But I'm focused on the flood. Specifically, if this picture right here, I want to comment on this picture on this slide, is that picture is 12 feet high, that structure. But the problem when they were building this is they were building it in a super swampy environment. And they knew that the weight of this structure, once they build it, it was going to sink about 3 feet down into the mud of the swampy environment that they were building on. And that's exactly what it did. And so they built it and it sank into the mud about almost 3 feet until it came to a stop. And so I just kind of want to comment, if you guys are ever building on like squishy surfaces, I'm not sure what your permafrost situation is or how the ground soils are out there, but it's nice that this product does extremely well on ground surfaces that are squishy and sink. And so it's not a catastrophic problem in our experience. Here's an example. This is a flood wall that I built to protect a building on the Mississippi River. The picture on the left is when it had 7.5 feet of flood water against it. And the building on the right is just after we finished. And so one of the things I would comment is, this thing had, almost 8 feet of flood water against it. So, good thing the water stopped because it was at the full height of the barrier. That had water against it for over 30 days. And then it happened again for almost another 30 days. And so it's just nice to illustrate that not only can this product take the water to the full height of the barrier, but if you have water that's up against it for an extended period of time, it still continues to hold strong. Real quick, this is just to talk about gap closures, where a lot of times we'll do flood barriers. Maybe they have to span across a road that you have to keep open, or a building that you have to keep access to, or a beachhead, or what have you. And so in this particular project, is what I do is every year I'll go back there and I tear a hole in it, as you can see on the left, and then I'll go back and I'll plug the hole on the right when the floodwaters are getting to arrive. And so in this particular case, it takes about a day, less than a day, to actually go back and plug that hole. And then, just for the sake of anybody that might want to look at it, the sequence of the video of this particular plugging, get the gap, or the gap closures we call it, is on the URL link there, the YouTube video below. So it gives you a really good idea of how to work with it, as it shows just basically fixing this hole. I just discussed that one as a duplicate in there, so I apologize. But again, the HESCO can sink in the mud without it being a problem. We've never experienced a problem with it sinking in mud to date. This is just for everyone to be aware. This is the specification sheet of the actual product. Basically, you'll see the picture of it. There's 5 individual cells that are linked together. It's 15 feet long, but you can separate any 2 cells anywhere along the row, which I'll show here in a little bit. But the fact that there's 5 of them linked together just makes it easier to do long stretches quickly and easily without having to essentially wire a whole wall together. So on this document, you'll see the packaging, the shipping, the fact that you can get 150 linear feet worth of it onto one of those pallets. As far as shipping and the logistics is concerned, is extremely friendly, which is particularly important to the likes of Alaska, because I appreciate you guys are always expensive to ship to. These are some of the other walls that I built. This is I built, the one on the right is one I built in Afghanistan. The one on the left is one I built in Sudan. These were both to stop bombs. And so, but more than anything else, I'm just showing you the ability that you can stack these things extremely high, and the fact that they're strong enough to hold the weight of whatever's on top of them. So that's a testament to the strength of the barrier itself. Now, I'm going to go through some of the quick examples of testing with HESCO. The Corps of Engineers has put HESCO through their test basin. So it's been tested against wave impact. It's been tested against debris impact. It's been tested against overtopping, and it's been tested against seepage rates. On every single one of these tests, HESCO passed. It's a pass-fail rating, and HESCO has been the primary product of choice by the Corps since at least 2005 as far as stopping flooding. So, I mean, most all deployments since 2005 have been HESCO that I'm aware of. And so it's certainly been tried and tested on the flood aspect. But I also got asked about debris impact. People say, hey, there's a tree that's floating down. What happens if a huge tree hits it? And so this is an example of the Texas Transportation Institute where there was a 6.8 ton truck traveling 51 miles per hour with a 2-1 stacked configuration of a very similar size to what we're talking about here. And it was unable to go through the barrier. The one on the left is the point of impact. The picture on the right is where it came to a stop. So, I mean, as far as a debris impact, that's a pretty gleaming case of the fact that it can take the impact. And not only can it take the impact, but if it's an overwhelming impact, the damage is isolated to the point of impact. Like, for example, in this case, you can see that the whole structure did not tip over in any way, except for maybe that little spot where the actual point of the truck impacting the barrier was. So it's comforting to know that if you have a tree that magically has a catastrophic impact, which we've never experienced, it's going to be isolated to that point of impact. Here's an example of a car bomb testing I did on the product in Sweden. Basically, we did 880 pounds of ANFO, which is
Mr. Anderson, can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you. We have a question from the assembly. Mr. Keller.
Sure.
Thank you. On that slide, like I am noticing that, while the overall structure does appear to have held up pretty well, that there is like one of the bottom HESCO seems to be tilted over and damaged a little bit.
Correct.
If that were to happen if there was a flood and there was a debris impact, how easy is your barrier designed to be repaired, especially if it's on like a lower level like that?
I'm going to show you that. I got a repair sequence that's coming up here in a couple slides from now. To fix any single cell, it takes about 20 minutes to fix it. If hypothetically, if there was water on the other side of that truck, like let's just pretend that there's water on the other side and water wants to seep through. I mean, you can reinforce it with sandbags. A lot of times you can throw a sheet of plastic over there to stop the seepage. If hypothetically it had been like completely breached, which we've never experienced, but I'm going to show you how to fix it here in just a couple slides if that works. Is that adequate for the time being?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Here, this is a 880-pound car bomb test. It's a fertilizer bomb. It's ammonium nitrate. This type of explosive has the biggest pushing power of any other explosive out there. And so that's, if you want to blow up a building, it's the fertilizer bomb that's going to push it over because of just the way it ignites. And so this was car bomb test showing what happens if a car bomb gets exposed to a HESCO. And so this first one was about 15 feet away. And it was still well within the blast wall, within the fireball. That's why you can tell the upper right picture, it did the fabrics melted. But the lower picture shows the backside of that wall. So, there would have been flying debris, flying car parts that were propelled by 880 pounds of fertilizer bomb and a huge blast wave. And there was no penetration through the wall. And additionally, the wall did not fall over. Now, that was a huge blast at 15 feet. But for this particular military organization, it was the Swedish Army, they wanted to blow it apart. Because what they wanted to see is, hey, if we blow a hole in this wall, what's going to happen to the rest of the wall? Is it going to be isolated to this point of the blast, or is it going to somehow cause a greater section of the wall to tip over? And so again, they were expecting to blow this thing up with 880 pounds in contact, as they call it. And you can tell that the damage to the wall is essentially isolated right to where that overwhelming charge was, which is way bigger than any debris impact you're ever going to encounter. But it shows, I do this to illustrate the fact that a single tree is not going to accidentally pull over a whole line of this material. Here's another example, 220 pounds of explosives immediately behind the wall. They were trying to bust it open. They were trying to see how far gravel fill material would fly in relation to the sand fill material. They found it's about the same. But as far as we're concerned, I'm trying to illustrate again to you guys that outside of where that where that bomb was placed, everything else is still holding strong. So it's not like it blew the barrier away. So I'm just trying to kind of illustrate the ability of this product to withstand overwhelming blast, explosives, not to mention debris impact, crashing cars, what have you. Now, sometimes you'll get a single unit that's busted. Maybe. Usually it's people that are bad drivers normally. But at any rate, a lot of my job downrange was to go around and fix anything that might have been damaged. And so here's an example where there was a busted unit right there. And so the upper left picture, busted HESCO. Upper right picture, I simply cut off that panel of HESCO and scooped out enough dirt to kind of allow me to lower left picture. That's just a single panel with a helical coil on either side. So I attached the helical coil to that panel of wire. And then the lower right picture, I put it right back over that busted unit and then screw it back together. And then you go ahead and backfill it. Here's another example of one I did. This wall is 7, 14, 15, 16, 17, about 19 feet tall, this particular structure. But you can see the one cell that I was able to replace, that I was able to fix the one panel. So, with the average HESCO that's used for civil applications, it takes about 20, maybe 30 minutes to fix. So it's super easy to fix. Now, this is where I like talking about the fun stuff with HESCO. I mean, you can fill up a long line of HESCO. You can stack it. I mean, pretty much, dare I say, almost as high as you want. But you can take it apart and put it back together to just build all sorts of amazing stuff. And so here's an example where we were doing debris flow mitigation. Picture on the right shows the fired crew. They just got off the forest fires and now they're instantly going into debris flow flood mitigation. And in this case, they were expecting debris flows coming down that water on the side. And so all I did was I took one single cell of HESCO and then just wrapped it around that tree and filled it. Now, it's not necessary to do that, but I mean, it's super inexpensive. The tree's not going anywhere. It just adds extra rigidity to the line of HESCO. And so, I'm not saying that you have to do this, but I'm just saying that if you're out there building a project in the bush, if you will, and, you can reinforce it in a variety of ways. And that's one example. Here's another example. The one on the left is the same project, actually further down that same run. And they only put one row of HESCO in there, but they thought that maybe as the debris impact comes flying around that corner, maybe they'd like to have it a little bit kind of bulked up. And so I was simply able to take a few individual cells and then just butt them up every so often to essentially act as like a kickstand. I mean, I don't expect the HESCO to move anyway, but that's a super simple way to reinforce it. The picture on the right shows that was a coastal application where we were trying to stop oil from the deep water horizon, but the scouring of sand and the wave impact, basically to further reinforce it against those forces, we just simply put a couple buttresses every so often down the road to stabilize it. So I'm not saying that you have to do that, but if you're on the engineering kind of in the field aspect, it's a super easy way to reinforce what you've already built. Here's an example also to show how you can take the product apart and modify it in so many ways. You can see the picture on the left. There's a flood coming on the Mississippi River. These oil derricks were getting ready to get flooded. They needed to span a flood barrier through those pipes on the left picture and butt it into that levee. So but they couldn't mess with the pipes. And so is what we did is we just put a HESCO on either side of those pipes and then wired it together, which you can see in that middle picture. And in the picture on the right, we just relined it with geotextile fabric and then filled the wall. And you can see how those oil pipes go right through the wall. They're watertight. They're not cut, molested in any way. So it's a great way that you can plumb stuff through a HESCO wall. And in this example, it could be drainage. Maybe you're building a HESCO wall that you're worried about water on the dry side. You can put a pipe right through the bottom of that wall with like a check valve that allows water to drain out from the wet side if you're ever worried about water building up on the wet side. Here's an example where I've also modified the HESCO in a variety of ways. The picture on the upper left is where I just took a panel, the main panel of HESCO, and then I reconnected it further into the cell itself in order to allow room for that access control panel. The picture on the lower one, that's where I tied the levee, the HESCO into a levee. And what I did is I just cut the bottom of the HESCO to where it essentially disappeared right into the levee, which is an amazing way to do it because sometimes people like to dig into the levee to tie a flood barrier into a levee. But when you do that, you dig into it. So you've lost your root structures. You have loose dirt. Water can start scouring and just create problems. But the way that you just cut the bottom of the HESCO to tie into it, all those root structures are there and in place. And so therefore this tie-in, if you will, is more robust against scouring because the roots that are already in the ground, the HESCO didn't mess it up. And so I also got a question about, what happens if you have like a really bad footprint surface? What if you're trying to go over concrete or riprap or you can't make it completely level? The one on the right is a picture where I just cut the bottom of the HESCO to conform to a set of stairs as I essentially disappeared the HESCO into a flight of stairs. And so that's kind of an example that shows how you can cut the bottom of the HESCO to conform to wherever you need it, if you will. And so the fact that you can take any of these panels of wire completely apart and put them all back together, it makes it super versatile. If any of you guys ever remember, if you ever go to just Google the expression, how to modify a HESCO barrier, it'll take you to our Flood Defense Group website. And there's a variety of additional pictures, but I don't want to get too into the weeds here. And then finally, with HESCO, it's nice because you have a soil-filled basket. You can landscape it. And so you can plant trees, bushes, native shrubbery, what have you. And the fact it's a green product to begin with, does help it blend into the environment, while it sits there. Whether if it's a temporary fix and you want to just keep, you want to have it look nice in the interim, it's just nice that you can landscape it and essentially vegetate it. And so that's it. I tried not to get too much into the weeds. I tried to kind of give a good idea of the testing, the capabilities, show you some of the structures, basically the basics of it. It's an amazing tool that you can use, in a variety of different ways. It's to solve a variety of problems in the flood defense arena. I mean, myself, I do flood barriers. We have a dozen different options, and HESCO is definitely the one that is the most tried and tested flood barrier globally, to the best of my knowledge. I mean, that's out part of a traditional sandbag. It really has been vetted through field experience. So outside of that, that's it. Does anybody have any questions? Reference the HESCO product.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. A couple of questions. Mr. Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Can you speak a little bit about longevity? Have you had any flood defense barriers that have been in place for multiple years? And what does the maintenance look like for just normal wear and tear?
Understood. And if you go to the how to modify a HESCO barrier on the Flood Defense Group website, I did a whole write-up on that. Generally speaking, the manufacturer has a design life of 5 years. It has been my experience in the field, in the harshest UV environments that I've encountered, that it's roughly between the 8 to 10 year mark that you start to see the very beginning, what I call stress tears along the top of the unit, which are the first signs of degradation. It doesn't cause a loss of soil, in my experience on that. But generally 8 to 10 years is when you start to see the first signs of degradation in a harsh UV environment. If it's shaded, if you have vegetation growing on it, if it's not oriented to the sun, then I mean you can easily expect double. But the manufacturer does, for liability purposes, say a 5-year design life. Now, within that article I told you about, is we did take steps to reinforce the fabric from the effects of the sun by just spraying a cement slurry mixture on it, like a cement, like a stucco, a cement slurry. I've seen just mud actually, or shaded vegetation that shades it will also do it. I mean, anything that puts a layer between the sun and the HESCO, pretty much stops the degradation of the geotextile. I mean, I spent many years monitoring it, so I don't want to sound wishy-washy when I say pretty much. So I would summarize in saying that 5-year design life, personal, I would expect it to easily last 10 years. If you take UV steps to stabilize it from the UV, then you go from the design life of the fabric to the approximate 25-year design life of the welded wire mesh.
Very good. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. I appreciate you showing your process for repairing in the event of an unlikely failure. I did want to follow up with that a little bit. It appeared that you were showing how it would be repaired in dry conditions. I'm imagining that if there is a glacial outburst flood and a tree impacts and dislodges the HESCO barrier, if the barrier is, for instance, submerged, have you done any testing in that situation to see how that might complicate or extend the amount of time that it would take to repair the barrier in that case?
No, I think that in large part, I mean, you can repair the barrier. If the barrier's on the wet side with water up against it, then I would probably say you're looking to either dump a bulk sack or some sandbags in there, maybe try to plug the gap with a sheet of plastic. I have never seen a barrier bust in a flood event. And furthermore, I've never seen it have a debris impact such that there was seepage that came through the wall. And so I haven't had experience with that. I think the best thing that I would probably say is that in a flood event, if the water's that high against the barrier, there's probably a high likelihood that the evacuation order has probably been given. And then I would think that I would expect it never to be a full breach the way those explosives blew a hole in it. Chances are, if something does happen, it's going to be an isolated breach to an isolated area. And so I know that doing flood defense, generally, you're only trying to stop water long enough for the water to go away, which in most cases is only a matter of hours. And so if you did have a catastrophic, I don't want to say catastrophic, if you did have a breach of your wall and there was water coming through, again, I would try to plug it with sandbags and or plastic. If I couldn't be there, then I would probably be, just more than anything else, comforted with the fact of knowing that that breach is going to be isolated to that specific spot without any real concern of it somehow creeping and becoming a wider spread problem because of how well the HESCO stays in place, even if there's a damaged area.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Anderson, for your presentation. Does it make a difference of what the fill is inside the HESCO barriers?
Ideally, ideally sand is ideal. Sand, you can with sand with some fines in it is also okay, because fines within the sand, does a good job to kind of clog up any porosity of the sand itself. Although that being said, I've seen people fill them with just about anything. One of the biggest things I would say is if you're filling it with, you don't want to fill it with mud. You'd like to fill it with dirt or something more of a, it's hard to pack mud. And so if you're using it with dirt, some sort of dirt, ideally that's not muddy, then you can still get a compaction value out of it. And so, I would just pay close attention to trying to pack or consolidate whatever you're putting inside of it, specifically if it's dirt or soils. Generally sand, it consolidates well by itself. We do suggest compacting the units. But people have filled it with pretty much everything under the sun.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Smith. I had two questions. One, if you could maybe explain to us how the tear down or takedown happens in 4 or 5 years. What could we be looking at to remove a handful of barriers from your backyard? But then, as we're talking about failures or individual breaks, I'm envisioning a full tree with its root system barreling down the river at 30 miles an hour, and it's not going to hit the HESCO barrier at a perpendicular indication or perpendicular mark to try and penetrate it, but it's going to rip down the side of multiple HESCO barriers. What happens when you got like a tree root that's ripping at the side of it down in a whole length? What would that do to the stability of it?
So normally, let's see here. I'll start the tree root first. I haven't seen something like that rip off multiple face panels of a HESCO, but let's just pretend like that does happen. Let me just see if I can find a visual aid here. Bear with me here. Okay, I'll just use this for example. Okay, so if this is my HESCO and the tree root breaks into the HESCO or maybe rips that front face of the HESCO off, because the HESCO has panels of wire that go all the way around, it's very unlikely that the tree is going to penetrate the HESCO and then penetrate through the back side to give any sort of full breach. And so if hypothetically the HESCO did get penetrated by the tree and did rip a panel of the wire open, then chances are as that flood water is going by the HESCO, it's going to swirl, and then whatever dirt that's inside that basket will start to swirl out. However, I've never seen, like if the HESCO is filled all the way to the top, I've never seen swirling take any of this dirt out to the point of like fully removing it. Because most of the time the break's going to be isolated to, we'll just say up here where that is. And so it would be hard for it to take all the dirt out the front of it when the back of the HESCO on the dry side still has a bunch of like soil up against it. And so the swirling, I mean, I don't foresee even a tree having a catastrophic impact on multiple cells of the HESCO, even if it tore each one of those cells open. I have never seen the water to be able to scour the unit out such that it would create a breach. However, the water, it could scour out it enough that the soil gets low enough, therefore less, therefore you have a half full basket of HESCO, then water is going to start to seep out the fabric on the dry side, which I would envision still to be in place and intact. Because I highly doubt a tree is going to be able to penetrate through a HESCO, and the primary concern would be it ripping part of the face off. But because it's still connected with a bunch of good cells on the right and the left, and then it's unable to go all the way through, I wouldn't envision it to create any sort of catastrophic problem. And then, so your failure break. You had one other question. Oh, and then the tree, the impact. I mean, I've got pictures of large car bombs where the engine block has been buried into the HESCO. And it was unable to penetrate through the HESCO, and I have a variety of car bomb tests that show a variety of debris, that's riding a blast wave and will hit with more force than a tree. And so I have every indication that I have ever seen is that a HESCO will not have a problem stopping that debris impact. And so I would expect it to essentially deflect off the HESCO and then keep floating down the way. And I believe that any damage that did happen would be isolated.
Mr. Bresson, follow up.
Yeah, my second question was about the takedown of them. What is the procedure when we get to the end of their useful life? How do we put everybody's yard back together again?
So there's two different options. If you look on that website thing, how to modify a HESCO, on there's a thing called a lifting beam. And I know that the Corps of Engineers does have one. I believe they have one. Where essentially it's like a big spreader bar that you put over the HESCO, you attach clamps to it, and then you pick it up, and then all the dirt falls out the bottom. Now, one of the things that I would comment on though is if you're doing a stacked configuration, if your top unit, when you pick it up, all that dirt's going to bury your lower units. And so you're probably going to have a backhoe available to kind of move that dirt around to essentially expose each individual row. But you put you hover the lifting beam over the HESCO, put on the clamps, and then you pick it up, dirt falls out the bottom. Other than that, then it's really common. You just take an excavator and you basically rip the faces off of it. And then you kind of get it to like lean over halfway. And then you just get a bucket with claws on it and you just pick it up. And then all the wire and fabric kind of separates itself from the dirt. And then obviously you destroy them. You can't reuse them. But those are the two ways to remove HESCO.
Very good. Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, you mentioned the impacts of UV on the HESCO barriers. UV isn't really our problem here in Juneau so much, but we do get a lot of year-round rain. And I was just wondering if you've seen impacts on maintenance and the barriers with a lot of rain exposure year-round.
No, I have not. And actually, I've more than anything else, if I see the HESCO get a bunch of moisture inside the barrier, I've seen like algae or grass or like some like mossy stuff grow on the fabric, which actually protects it from the UV. So no, there's no adverse effects of water on the fabric. I would comment though that salt water, if you get salt water, you can have rust issues if you have salt water that's repeatedly beating up against them.
Very good. Mr. Anderson, I have a question. You've mentioned it before, but I just want to confirm in your 20 years of working with these things on rivers, there's never been a breach due to a large tree traveling in a swift water. I mean, I think you've said there's never been a breach, period, but I just want to confirm there's not that.
There was one breach in Davenport, and that was a construction error. And I mean, I'll leave that for other people to kind of go through the weeds on. But there was one single row of HESCO, 4 feet tall, with I think like 18 inches of sandbags stacked on top of it, and it was sitting completely on plastic. So we never put a flood barrier of any kind on plastic because of the friction value. And so what happened is the water and the dirt, it was a loose soil that wasn't compacted. Water was against it for a very significant period of time. And it rose up past the height of the top of the barrier and the product slid. So that did happen. I would comment that you never put a HESCO on a sheet of plastic.
Very good. Mr. Anderson, I had one final question for you. You no longer work for HESCO or are paid by HESCO, is that correct?
That is correct.
Very good, thank you. Seeing no other questions for Mr. Anderson, maybe let's kick it over to Mr. Martinez and Mr. Allard for their presentation. And just for the public's information, we did just receive these presentations, so we are learning quickly and may have plenty of questions. Thank you, gentlemen, please proceed.
And Mr. Smith, if
Yes.
I might, we do have paper copies at the back of the room, and these are also available on our website on the online packet.
Very good, thank you, Madam Clerk.
Hello, once again. We're from Army Corps of Engineers, and we're here to talk about advanced measures, technical assistance, developing a plan, phase 1 and phase 2 being the HESCO barriers, and then the general investigation study. Would you forward the slide, please? And then one more. And Dan Allard, he's with the emergency management, and he'll be able to fill you in on Public Law 8499 advanced measures.
So on this slide, you see there's two columns, obviously. You have completed all of the things in the left column, which are all prerequisites for Public Law 8499, advanced measures. Okay, so there is an imminent threat of unusual flooding here on the Mendenhall River. The governor did request our assistance. That the non-federal interests, which is the city, the CBJ, you are committed available resources that you can pay for, labor and so forth. The benefit to cost ratio has to be greater than 1.0. You're going to be much higher than that. You're protecting a lot of economic interests, housing, roads, infrastructure, and all of that. And the HESCO barrier is relatively inexpensive. And the public sponsor, which is you, and you've already done this, the mayor has executed a cooperative agreement, or was it Ms. Coster? Did you execute it? Okay, we have one. So the things in the right column are important attributes, if you will. So we cannot protect erosion, anything that could be erosion. All we can do is protect property and lives using advanced measures. We can do things to clear the channel and to make sure that the channel remains open enough to maintain its flow. So I'm sure you've noticed the sedimentation that takes place once the water slows down, right? Then that also happens in the river channel. It needs to be scoured out or dredged. We can take care of that as part of advanced measures to make sure that the river channel continues to flow like it's supposed to. Also, the public sponsor, and I believe this goes to Mr. Bryson's question, public sponsor must agree to remove advanced measures temporary work when operation is over at no cost to USACE. So that I don't foresee you necessarily needing to remove these temporary measures anytime soon. They will last 10, 15 years in this environment. They'll last a long time. So that gives you time for what we are calling the investigative study, right? For a more permanent solution to the issue that you're going to have. That's going to require an economic study. It's going to require environmental studies. It's going to take a long time, 10 years, let's say. Even if we do it quickly, it's still going to be a long time, much more time than you have to protect the people down on the river. And you can see on the bottom, right, the investigative costs, 100% USACE funded. Engineering and design, 100% USACE funded. That's USACE is us, United States Army Corps of Engineers, sorry. I couldn't fit it all on the slide. Temporary construction, again, that is 100% USACE funded. Now, I don't mean that your assets aren't employed. I'm talking about the materials and things like that, getting them here. And then the removal of the construction is on you. Okay, next slide. So in the technical assistance that comes with HESCO, with the HESCO barriers, and I will tell you that this comes from somebody who's listening in here from the United States Army Corps of Engineers flood fighting community of excellence, which is in Rock Island, Illinois, and Corey is listening to what's going on here. It was on his suggestion that we suggest to you the HESCO barriers. It's quick, it is really effective, and it's inexpensive. Okay, that's why we're suggesting the HESCO barriers. They are the fastest thing out there, and I was in the Army for 30 years, spent a lot of time downrange. They stop bombs. They will stop a tree. It is not an issue. They're really strong. Okay, the contractor who you just spoke to, right, that HESCO contractor was Keith Anderson. He will be coming with the HESCO barriers, or one of his coworkers, I don't remember her name, but will be coming with the HESCO barriers to assist and to help develop crews. He has a way he does it. He trains the trainer, and he'll get multiple crews working to do it, and he will make sure that you're able to place the HESCO barriers to standard before he leaves. That's in his contract. What else can I say on there? Okay, you actually have a lot of responsibilities too, though, right? You have to provide the labor for putting the HESCO barriers in. What I'm talking about is the shovel operators, right? Heavy equipment operators. You may have to provide logistical support, in other words, transportation to get the HESCO barriers to the job site. The suitable fill. I know you got a lot of sand around here, right? And sand is by far the best thing to use. It provides the best waterproof, it's not waterproof, but the best water protection when it's combined with the geotextile materials. Provides the best. If you use gravel, gravel has spaces for the water to flow through. That's why you use sand. You also have to provide rights of entry to the people's property so you can put these things up, right? And that might be an issue because they're not the most, it's not area beautification, right? It's flood protection. If permitting is required, you'll have to do that. That's not on the Corps of Engineers, that's on you. Right now, you are under emergency conditions, so permitting is very easy right now. So knock, knock, you want to do this as fast as possible, because as soon as EPA and everybody else gets involved, it could be a long time before you get the permits because you're messing with a waterway. Also, you need to know what the alignment's going to be for the HESCO barriers, right? How far setback you're going to be. Basically, you don't have to survey it, right? But you have to know where you want the HESCO barriers to go and make sure that the property owners are okay with it. And you have to know how high you want it to be. So we have people that can suggest to you, right, that this will be the highest water level. We already know 15.99 feet last year, right, or in August. That might not be high enough. We don't know, right? But so you make that determination. That's going to make your logistical determine how much supply you want because of the way you have to construct it. You just you can't stack things, 4 and 5 high without making them somewhat of a pyramid, right? So they have a strong base. You want to have a pyramid type shape. Same thing when you build sandbag levees, right? They're a pyramid shape. Really, that's all I have on that slide. So, barring any questions.
Mr. Martinez, please.
Thank you, Dan. As part of developing a plan that the city went through, they talked with USACE technical experts and emergency management to determine the best way to protect homes along the river. And technical experts and city engineers walked the river. I was there last week, and we looked at the elevations, and we talked with homeowners, and we viewed high water marks. So all of that was looking at the areas of concern. Some homes got flooded from the riverside and from the street side. So all of those were taken into concern. And then also we talked to residents. We looked at aerial imaging before, during, and after the flood to determine the extent of flooding. And then as for HESCO placement, we looked we looked at site prep, how much site prep is going to be needed for along these homes, riverside, firm level foundations, adequate drainage, use of appropriate fill, sand being the best option. Units lined up and checked for levelness and correctly joining the units, and then obviously just the nitty-gritty of tamping down every so often to get a good firmness in the sand or in the fill material. Next slide. And so this is a map of the river where phase 1 and phase 2, where we're going to be lining the HESCO barriers, and it goes all the way to phase 1 is Marion Drive to Kilwich Drive to Meander Way, and it's about 2 miles of barriers along the developed side of the river. And the rationale for prioritizing Marion Drive to Kilwich is to Meander Way is that's where the river jumped the bank and determined and depending on the vent, we could redirect the flow to the unpopulated side of the river. I mean, the majority of homes damaged during the August 24 flood will be protected. And then phase 2 plans will be developed to protect the majority of the remaining developed property along the Mendenhall River. Next slide. And that's what I was talking about with phase 1 and phase 2. Next slide.
Mr. Martinez, one moment, we have a question. Mayor Weldon.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So phase 1 is around the corners, and I can understand that. Phase 2, from the bridge down, on Back Loop Bridge down, it seems pretty straightforward. That's developed land. We're looking at putting in yards for the most part. But up above is View Drive, which is not developed. It's more trees and boulders and stuff. Do you see a challenge with up above where the View Drive is, or is this something that works as well during that kind of landscaping as it would be a yard?
I would have to take a closer look to answer that question. I'm sorry, that's not a really good answer.
Thank you, please proceed.
And so the general investigation study, next slide. The general investigation study, as Dan briefly mentioned, is the long-term, where we look at the long-term options, and that includes hydrologic data, environmental studies, real estate economic cost-benefit ratios, and then combining all of those to give the city the best information that we have. And there's some cost sharing involved, and not to get into the nitty gritty, but that's just basically what we look at when we look at the general investigation study. And those take some time to develop because we have to do a lot of research and more data gathering. Next slide. Any questions?
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. In some of the outreach I've done with the community, I've had some people express concerns about perhaps like just implementing phase 1 might block the water in one area, but cause it to damage another area more severely. Would you be able to maybe speak to any of the, you were just speaking a little bit to some of the studying that you're doing. Would you be able to speak to any of the studying that's gone into that or that you're planning on going into that before we put up the barriers in phase 1?
So would you repeat the question one more time?
You're very hard to understand, sir.
I'm sorry.
Well, no, it's not you, it's the echo.
Sound system is challenging.
Really difficult.
All right, I'll try to.
Mr. Kelly, one moment.
Thank you. I just, Deputy Mayor, I think that some of the like location-specific questions, I know that Philip and Dan aren't quite as familiar with our neighborhoods as Chief Engineer Bohan. So I would like him to sit at the table so he can help answer like questions about, what about this neighborhood and when you go here, just because, that it's hard for them not living here to understand all those twists and turns.
Mr. Bohan, please drag your chair out. Let's try that again, Mr. Kelly.
All right, thank you. I've just been hearing from some members of the community who might be a little bit concerned about how implementing, just the phase one at this point might cause adverse issues in other neighborhoods or in other areas. I just was wondering, are you able to hear me all right? Okay. 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 Would you be able to speak to what study has gone into the effects that implementing phase one will have on the flow and impacting or overflow in other areas? What study has been done and what study you might still be planning on doing?
Mr. Bohan.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I did finally get that. So we have not done any studies. We have Michael Baker International, who will be under contract by the end of the week, as I understand it, working on hydraulic modeling and working on new inundation studies. We expect them to be able to evaluate the existing data that they have and come up with a plan by the end of November, which will give us some time to react and hopefully have something from them by late winter, early spring to understand what not only, first step would be what the river is going to do with or without the barriers. We know what 15.99 flood level did based on the inundation maps, and the experts have said it has worked. Their inundation mapping modeled really well. That's a bonus for us moving forward to have that to test our assumptions to move on the new model. We still need to know what happens when we hit 17, 18, God forbid 19. I don't know what the numbers are, but we need to rely on those guys to do that modeling. At this point, we have taken a snapshot of the Mendenhall Valley, looked at phase one, which identifies approximately 300 homes that were impacted during this 2024 event, and said we need to fix that first. We don't know if the water is going to build up further downstream. I don't think it's going to back up upstream, but what's going to happen by moving it downstream. We don't know exactly what that's going to be. That's what the modeling is going to tell us, and then that's going to be our next reaction point. But at this point, we're trying to save 200 plus homes, 280 plus homes that were damaged during this flood.
Mr. Kelly, a follow-up.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And so just to make sure that I understand correctly and so that the public listening also understands correctly, that studying will be done prior to the implementation of phase one.
As far as we can tell, the study will not be done, but we should have some good information to move on because that study is going to take quite some time to actually finalize. So the procedure will be essentially developing a very coarse model first, which is a very rough model based on the existing assumptions that we have, and testing that against what we know for the 2023 flood, the 2024 flood, to get us an idea of the expansion. We're probably going to take another year to get a very refined model, if not more, with river cross sections, a whole bunch of detailed surveying, and a bunch of analysis. So we're going to be working on very preliminary data, but we're going to trust that it's going to be modeled against the existing floods to help move forward.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'm not sure who this question is for. It may be for Mr. Anderson or CBJ or CORE. it was more clear to me listening to the presentation that our concerns should not be around barriers failing, but around our banks failing and the erosion that could take place during a flood event. Whose responsibility is it? The Corps that is helping us kind of figure out how to shore up our banks to prevent that erosion and prevent the barriers from failing, or is that CBJ? How is that being cared for?
You're living why I don't sleep at night. That question is exactly the major question that all of us are worried about. And we spent last Wednesday and Thursday walking through with Philip and his counterpart, Michael Records, going through a lot of that. And we still have some determinations to make on bank stabilization, locations to place them, because that is a significant concern. It may not be for the next event, but it might be for a 2-year event or a 3-year event from now. So you may think we're erring in caution on recommending bank stabilization or armoring protection or scour protection in front of these barriers, but we're trying to provide a product at our best assurances that will last more than one event and that we don't have to spend a bunch of time maintaining. A couple of things that came from the walkthroughs with Philip and Mike last week were keep as far away from the bank as possible. So we may be right up against people's homes, which which may not be the most popular decision, but if the bank's going to go, we want to have as much warning and protection as possible. We may have to come back and dismantle some sections of barrier at times to restabilize a section of bank that we see start failing. But our first shot is going to be our best shot to get all this done correctly, and that's why we're really taking this seriously. And I'll be honest, that's why I've done nothing but this for the past 6 weeks, and probably through the winter is what we're going to do, and get a bigger team of experts to dig into the bank stabilization to make sure we've got it right.
So I brought up before, advanced measures cannot handle erosion. There are other programs through the Corps of Engineers that does. So stream bank stabilization and coastal erosion is one of those. That's it's called Section 14, and I'll talk to John about it later. It's also through Civil Works and Emergency Management, but it involves a pretty significant cost share. Yes, it can be done. But it's a whole nother program, and what we came to help with is HESCO barriers, which fall under advanced measures. As soon as we start crossing the streams in Ghostbusters, we start running into legal problems, and we don't want to do that.
Very good. Ms. Wall, follow up.
Just a quick follow-up on that. I understood that from your presentation, but if it is in the service to making sure the barriers stay in place, is it within your purview?
It's how we put the barriers in. It's actually not how we put them, it's how you put them in with Keith's advice. So, and he's probably going to suggest to you things that you may not like, and John just talked about them, right? It might be right up against somebody's house, right? And, that's for the assembly to figure out. He's going to give you the best case scenario of where to put them and why. And that's really all he can do, because it's your labor, it's your city, it's how you want to do it.
Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I was wondering, Mr. Bohan, now that you're up here, is there any chance you could expand on the mayor's question about View Drive and potential challenges implementing the HESCO barriers there in phase 2?
I will be completely honest. We have talked about phase two as protecting the remainder of the developed areas along the riverbank. We have not gotten into the details of looking how to protect any of those areas. So understanding View Drive as a challenge is absolutely correct. We have not looked at it besides that. And we have really been focused on trying to deploy in phase one and be ready ahead of the next potential flood.
Very good. I had a question. Some have, come to us asking about dredging or kind of essentially cutting through some certain areas to maybe help the water flow or, so there's not so much water piled up at Killowitch and Meander. Was that evaluated? Anyway, I can imagine it's a more complicated project, but was that evaluated? And anyway, if you could just respond and give.
So once again, that is going to fall under our long-term plan in the general investigation when we do all of the when we run through all of the options or alternatives they call them. So there's a lot more research involved. So the short answer is no, not at this time, but potentially down the line.
Very good. And maybe last one. There's been discussion about levying the lake at the Mendenhall Lake. I understand, again, a very large project. And we've dedicated funds or allocated funds for the general investigation study. I mean, can that even be done without a general investigation study?
Not with the core at this time. That would be my answer. But once again, we can look into that into that alternative when we start the general investigation study.
Madam Mayor, thank you.
So just to reiterate, the HESCO barriers are our greatest short-term solution that may last several years while we do the general investigation study and figure out some other permanent solutions.
Correct.
Very good. Any further questions from the Assembly? Seeing none, gentlemen, thank you very much for your, thanks for your time and all your work you're putting in to assist our community. We appreciate it. We will take a short break. It's 7:13. We'll come back at 7:20.
I appreciate how that could quickly cause, quote, mission creep, end quote.
Moving on to the next agenda item, downtown employee office space in Burns Building. We have a memo in the packet with a specific recommendation. My understanding is the manager is looking for guidance on if the assembly wants the manager to move forward with establishing a business condo association and all the things that entails at the Burns Building. Madam Manager, is that the correct characterization of what you're looking for? Very good. We've seen the memo, it is in the packet. Madam Manager, did you have more things to add or anything you wanted to highlight? Or anyway, floor is yours.
You, Deputy Mayor, if you'd like, I can briefly walk you through the memo, or you can just answer questions. I just had a couple of things to highlight that are mentioned in the memo.
Sure, please.
As the Deputy Mayor mentioned, the purpose of this, that's really squeaky, a really squeaky drawer over here. The purpose of bringing this before you tonight is to get direction to work on a business condo association. So we're kind of very slowly moving towards the negotiations for purchasing 2 floors of the Burns Building. If you recall at the August 5th meeting, you authorized moving forward with an appraisal, and we anticipate getting that appraisal back in December. So because this beast really is very slow moving, meanwhile, our office needs are very acute and just seem to be getting worse and worse by the day. I'm anxious to be as prepared as we can when we have that information, which is why I'd like to get direction from you to work with the law department on what does that business condo association look like? You know, who pays for what? What's the cost of setting it up? And so there will be some expense to that, figuring all of that out. The one thing I'd like to just correct for the record is my August 5th memo mentioned that the Burns Building, the owners of the Burns Building, so the Permanent Fund Corporation, was asking 12 million or twice assessed value. That was a misleading statement because it didn't include the value of the parking lots, and there's 87 parking spaces that would go with that. So that actually increases what we assess. So, you know, assessed value, take it for what you might. It's not an appraisal, but that's what we assess it at around $11 million. So, you know, it's more like they're asking for 50% more than what we assess it at, not twice. So I just wanted to correct that because I thought that was a bit of a misleading statement. I go a little bit on to talk about kind of other downtown office space that we've talked about over time. But I think before I go into what about Marie Drake, what about Floyd Dryden, I'll pause and see if there's any questions or conversation about the Burns Building.
Very good, thank you. And obviously the Marie Drake, you know, potentially was looked at as a spot for downtown office space. Decisions on what to do there are going to be in the Public Works and Facilities Committee in December. But any questions on the Burns Building? Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Condo dues are monthly expense. If we come up with the $12 million and once that expense is passed, whether we finance it or not, what would our annual or monthly condo dues or maintenance, or would condo dues incorporate all maintenance, or would we anticipate having condo dues and maintenance fees? Has there been any discussion to see what the long-term cost would be?
Madam Manager.
Yeah, thank you. When we were originally kind of doing the math on whether or not to recommend purchase of these 2 floors, we asked that question about condo dues. And they, you know, gave us an estimate of about $650,000 a year for dues. And that's steep, but it also includes all of our maintenance, all of our repairs. And frankly, when you cost it out over 10 years, so paying that in condo dues and our purchase price, we will be able to purchase the building after 10 years. I think it's 20 years. I have the memo here. Is it 10? Okay, I'm sorry, 10 years. Remember though, we're a controlling partner of this condominium association. So, you know, if we're paying $600,000 and the Permanent Fund Corporation is paying $3 million, that's the money that we collectively as an organization have to spend on the operations and maintenance of this facility. So I'm less concerned about high condo association dues because they go back into the building that we will be a majority owner of.
Ms. Euskandis.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. That follow up on that, because that does seem, jaw-droppingly high. But I'm trying to imagine that as a percentage of the value of the building. We have gotten, negative feedback, rightfully so in some cases, but we've had some of our properties that we haven't maintained, and, I forget what the industry standard is, 2% to something else. How does that, you're talking about the maintenance and the operations of the building. Could you talk about how that number would fall in there? Did you look at that when you were considering the 10-year, just following on your thoughts?
I think your question is, did I do the math to compare what we should be spending and putting away for operations and maintenance to that figure? Is that your question?
Yeah, kind of. Just, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you said what, they're asking for about 50% more, but how does that, when we're looking at our investment over the 10 years, what, did it fall in that industry standard?
I did not do that math. It would be relatively quick to do that based on some of the memos that we've provided you in the past on best practices. Arguably, we spend about 2 to 4% of our maintaining our facilities, and an industry standard is higher than that. So, I think that if you take the highest end of that industry standard, you're getting closer to that 650. But I can certainly do that. I could do it now if I had that kind of brain, but gonna have to whip out my calculator.
I don't have it either. That's why I asked.
Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I think my question is starting to be answered. I was kind of wondering about it. I wasn't at the last meeting when we discussed this, so please excuse me if this was covered in depth. But the advantage of going co-op instead of purchasing the whole building, I was kind of assuming was a cost decision. It sounds like maybe cost is somewhat the same between the two options. Could you speak about kind of benefits of, buying the building and leasing it back was, kind of the alternative, the benefits of condo versus that option?
To be fair, we have not asked the permanent of incorporation what they would sell the entire building to us for, so I'm assuming it would be more than $12 million. They also are interested in still owning the top floor and still having that permanent presence in Juneau. So, that's the reason for the condo association, where we have kind of that joint ownership versus buying the entire building.
Madam Manager, I had a question. Do you know, I'm sure it's been changing a lot, do you know what we're paying in leases annually for non-city owned space? Or?
Yeah, right now it's probably around $800,000, which is less than last year because we've moved employees out of the Municipal Way building. But man, they are scattered across, as you can see in the end note to that memo. Employees are, those employees have been remote working. We're going to move into Marie Drake, didn't move into Marie Drake. Now they're moving into a building out in Auk Bay. So that we've been able, it's a little bit less than what it was last year, but the circumstances are less than ideal.
Very good. I do not see any more questions about the potential condoization of the Burns building. We may have some comments, but shall we start with a motion? Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to direct staff to research and develop documents for a condominium association in relation to the Burns building.
Very good. Any objection? Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I don't think anyone's surprised I'm objecting to this. And I do recognize that this is a no-win situation. we are in a real bind with our city office space, and there are no other good solutions. That being said, I have a lot of difficulty with this proposal. I had difficulty with leasing it. I have even more of a problem with purchasing it. I just really see this as a detriment to both short-term and long-term Juneau's future. Right now, currently in the short term, the permanent fund has been moving jobs to Anchorage and spending a lot of money to do it, and our state legislature is engaged in, cutting their budget and trying to prevent it in a bipartisan effort. It's not just, our current senator here in Juneau. It's a bipartisan, full legislature effort to stop them moving their jobs to Anchorage. And I do worry that we might undercut that effort if there's no space for them to come back to when they succeed. And in terms of long-term, I think we have an administration and a governor right now that is moving jobs out of Juneau, but that's not forever. We have a few more years of this, but there is potential for positive change in our, state administration. And I don't like this permanent change in state office space, and I worry that we are preventing jobs coming back to Juneau. So I know that there's no good solution, but I can't support this motion.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Atkinson. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Ms. Atkinson, that was the #1 argument that I used when I was advocating for why we needed to build a city hall from scratch, so that we did not take even 1 square foot away from available state office space. The community unfortunately answered back twice that they want the city to occupy existing office space downtown. So while I agree with you, I would have much preferred for us to have built that 100-year building. It would have been the best solution for the community. However, the community wished for us to take a different direction. And so we are still left in a position where we can own a building. And none of the other positions, none of the other directions that city management has looked at leaves us with ownership of a building. And so while it's not good to take office space, do I think that there's going to be a rush on state office space in the next few years? Probably not enough to warrant us backing out of a deal where we could end up with a city hall where we're at least condo ownership is better than renting. That's true for personal lives, and it's going to be true for the city government. Our fiduciary responsibility says that we are going to better serve the community by being in something that we can have ownership over, because we're in business forever. So, you're absolutely right, but we have to go the other way. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. My comment will just be, this has been a long and kind of torturous path on what to do with City Hall. I appreciate Ms. Cox reaching out to our new assembly members to speak with them and be there for questions about City Hall and the process it's gone through. I don't like that it's farther from the core of downtown. I don't like that it's potentially taking office space for the state. I tend to agree with Mr. Bryson that I don't see people necessarily moving back into their or state offices. APFC, I did reach out to them and ask. Evidently, in the space that they occupy on the 3rd floor, they could take all their employees who work remotely and in Anchorage, and if they were to move back in, there was space for that. So it's not blocking them, but I completely understand Ms. Atkinson's perspective, and that is definitely a concern for us and the community. I see no other comments. We have a motion and objection. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mayor Weldon.
Yes.
Mr. Bryson.
Yes.
Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
Ms. Atkinson.
No.
Ms. Wall.
Yes.
Ms. Hall.
Yes.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Yes.
Mr. Steininger.
Yes.
And Deputy Mayor Smith.
Yes.
Motion carries 8-1.
Moving on to our next. Thank you. Moving on to our next order of business, short-term rental task force. This is a instruction of the mayor with direction from the assembly it came to the assembly, there was some desire by assembly members to work on this. I believe that has happened, and I believe kind of the document in front of us is a result of that work. You know, again, this is our business. Obviously, staff supports us, but we come up with these terms, and you know, it's directed by the mayor and then subject to approval by the assembly. So we have the document. Ms. Hughes-Candies.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I wasn't trying to cut you off. No. I just wanted to let you know I wanted to talk. So I was one of the people who requested the chance to, or the first time that the mayor presented us with her charges, and she graciously agreed to take a look at it with me and Miss Wall, and Miss Wall made some changes that have made their way into this, which I think make it better. And in the mayor asking me, was I done making changes? Did I have other changes I wanted to talk about? It almost got to the point where the changes that I would suggest were substantial enough, not so much in spirit, but in sort of, we want to get something off to the races. And we also have 2 new members, so I was hoping that this would be a chance for us to talk about what is the best way to do the task force going forward. And that has, I think, less to do with wording at this point and just making sure we're on a page. So with that, I'll just launch into quickly kind of my thoughts are, I think the best things that we could hope to, or what I heard consensus at when we decided to come up with a task force, were we want to bring the community along, we want to get industry perspective and make that stronger and make sure they feel like they have a fingerprint on there as well. And yeah, we want to draw on our the expertise in the community rather than trying to come up with policy and then have folks tell us they didn't like it. We also said we wanted a task force light, which to me sounds more like a work group. So I do think this reminds me of the VIDIF, which is our most recent and most popular task force probably. We've spent some time with their recommendations. And I think what I'd be interested in hearing from the rest of the assembly is that the main changes that I would maybe want to make, as opposed to how this is now, is what if we took away a little bit of the reviewing the number of rentals in the task force, or reviewing kind of some of the data points, and then tasking the task force with creating this matrix, you know, kind of coming up with the solutions. And I'd be curious what it would look like if staff generated, here's the data points, here's the work that's been done, here's like an A, B, or C, and then let the work group get off to the races and, you know, really get their fingerprints on it. So I've been talking for a while, so I think I'll stop there. And then my only other thought was that I don't think I got to talk about with these 2 is whether the mayor knew if any of these were renters of the individuals, because I would think we should have a renter on there.
I'm going to hop in just really quickly and do a disclosure. Should this task force move ahead and I'm serving on it, I'm not sure if I have to do it at every meeting, but I should disclose that I operate my home as a short-term rental and have in the past. My understanding is that I don't need to recuse myself or anything from the discussion because any of the changes are broad enough to not have a direct impact on me. I'm seeing the attorney nod her head, but I just want to, and I can shore that up for the future. But Madam Attorney.
That's correct. You're
Very-
fine.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Wall, you were up.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I just wanted to speak to kind of the intention behind my changes here because I think like Ms. Hughes-Candies, it's bigger than words to me. It's about intention, and we have new members, so I want to make sure we are aligned in a way that I think we were when we brought this idea forward. When I saw the version that the mayor first put forward, There was language in here that suggested asking this task force to consider the option of doing nothing. And to me, what I had heard from this body at the time that this idea was proposed was an interest in moving forward with regulating short-term rentals. And we were looking to the community to help us with the potential suite of options that we could look at as policymakers. And so to me, that's a difference. We're not looking for this group to tell us yes or no regulation. We're asking for options that we intend to move forward. And so I'm still hopeful that's where this group is, but it would be helpful for me to hear that before we move forward. But in my mind, that's what these changes are meant to address.
Very good. I'll let Mayor Weldon speak, and then Mr. Kelly, I have you after.
All right, thank you. And the two ladies are speaking, are right, it's more the intent. I'll first start with Ms. Hughes-Scanny's questions. To give us options, they're going to have to understand where they're coming from, and one or two are most likely going to be done by staff. They're just going to, they're just going to get the information. They're not going to actually do any of the conducting of any review. They're not going to actually go out and get the number of short-term rentals. They'll be presented with information, which can be presented at the same time. One other piece of this on the intent that Ms. Hughes-Scanny's didn't mention, but I wanted to touch on was, I was hoping, and that's why I like the matrix, so we didn't have to keep coming back. We had some thoughts presented ahead of time as things change within the community that we didn't have to come back. So, and it's always good to have other people look, and I will granted that when I first presented this, it was a little bit rushed because we were also doing the Title 49. So I appreciate Ms. Wall and Ms. Hughes-Scanny's comments on this because I do think it's a better document. That's for sure. So, and the answer to Ms. Hughes-Scanny's, I didn't ask people if they rented. I just was looking for people that would probably be pro, would probably be against, and then I was looking for some data people. I'll bring out Milani Shivens for instance, that she would be able to help bring the data to people so they could understand it, along with a couple other names that I got from Mr. Barr. So I can answer that because I did ask them when I asked them if they rented.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Kelly.
I think my question might be moot at this point. I was just going to ask Ms. Hughes-Candy's, kind of what she meant by about not having the committee, but having the staff review the numbers. But I think the mayor might have also addressed that in her comments. So I'm good for now.
Ms. Hughes-Candy.
Yeah, absolutely. That got messy because I was like conversationally like, oh, here's what I want to hear from you guys. And then started talking about, I think, if it stays as written, that wouldn't be the end of the world. I just wanted to, I think Ms. Wall spoke to it best. If we're at a place that we're kind of like, we want to figure out what we're doing and figure out to where we don't have to think about it every 2 seconds. Is the direction still, yeah, go do that, and then like staff can help them and they can say, here's what we don't like about what staff came up with, and here's what you absolutely should not do. And so I think it's fine, but that's kind of where I was coming from, and it's a cleaner way of saying it. And then, Madam Mayor, could you speak to why you thought they would be against then, or what your metric was for people you thought would be against or for regulating short-term rentals?
I couldn't quite hear you. You were a little echoey on that side.
Like a pro con, if somebody has 10 short-term rentals and I think they probably don't want regulation against it, was a similar case, if not being a renter? Or how did you think that someone would want regulation of short-term rentals?
Because they stated it, and we had heard it in the crowds. I had picked up people that we had heard either from email or from testimony, that's where I came up with the names. Actually, I borrowed Ms. Madam Clerk for that, to help me with some names.
Very good. My only comments would be, we can, if we want to, we can do some wordsmithing and work on some things, or if we feel like this will work for now. I do see number one, the review of short-term rentals, probably being a pretty quick thing to check off. And I kind of agree it'd be good just to lay that out. And we'll see what the task force comes up with and what happens and the recommendations from there. But I would also say, as Assembly members, we have the ability to introduce legislation, whether or not a task force endorsed it or not. So anyway, we do have multiple ways forward. Mr. Senator.
So I wanted to comment on the first two items, review of common regulatory options and the, just data of what the universe of short-term rentals in Juneau are, I think are going to be two incredibly important pieces for my understanding of the task force's action. Ms. Wool, you mentioned removing the, kind of even discussion of a no action option. And when I'd read this, various regulatory actions, to me, a baseline of here is what the task force thinks the future of short-term rentals would look like if the Assembly took no action is, for me, I think would be an informative piece. So I kind of assumed that would be part of 4, or at least some level of discussion, maybe really it is piece 1, what's currently going on, is that description of no action plan, but kind of getting an idea of, what is the risk level of taking no action? Do we see, negative effects to our rental market to justify placing new regulation on property owners? And I kind of like to hear a little bit of that when the task force comes back.
Very good. Further questions or comments? Ms. Hall.
I'm wondering if, under number 1, reviewing. I'm wondering if under number 1, reviewing the number of short-term rentals, if that's also going to have some comparison of how that's changed over time. How many have left regular rental or how many have been added as, oh, hey, here's an opportunity to make some money. Let's turn this spare bedroom into a short-term rental. So some comparison with what was before and what has changed. So thank you.
Very good. As a possible member of the task force, I'd be definitely willing to make sure that's included. So. Seeing no further questions or comments, Madam Mayor, do you have a motion?
I move the short-term rental task force document to the full assembly and ask for unanimous consent.
Very good. Seeing no objection, that motion has passed. We'll go to the full assembly. Thank you. Next item of business, memorandum of agreement with Tlingit and Haida regarding public safety and solid waste. We received the MOAs, I believe, over this weekend or Friday. They're now in the packet. Manager Kester, any introduction or things you'd like to let us know?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'd just like to speak to these briefly. I'm really excited to be able to bring both of these memorandums of agreement with you with Central Council, Tlingit and Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska. It supports Assembly's goal, number 4, to really work to strengthen those government-to-government relationships. But it also leverages resources because, as we've experienced with flood and really working through solid waste issues too, Tlingit and Haida have access to just other programs and resources and staffing, right? They have staffing priorities. I think public safety is a great example. They have a permanent emergency manager and staff that, permanently works on response and readiness for emergencies. So being able to do that together, we can, learn from them. Solid waste also, the Tlingit and Haida has really taken an interest in our waste issues, which CBJ has taken a very strong interest in as well. And I know they're looking at really regional waste solutions because it's a struggle for the whole region. And I do want to mention that we have Mr. Raymond Paddock in the audience from Tlingit and Haida. You know, I was asked by the news media, how does this change how do these MOAs change daily business? And I really don't think it changes much. What it does is it establishes, it puts it in writing, it establishes the transparency that that we all can expect, right? Like, we are going to be talking with Tlingit and Haida about emergency management. We are going to be talking to Tlingit and Haida about solid waste management. And it commits to developing those shared relationships and those shared partnerships in kind of a structured way, right? We're committing to an annual meeting. We're committing to sharing information. We're committing to open and honest communication. We're committing to joint training. And so I appreciate the opportunity to kind of bring these before you in that context, in that spirit of collaboration and working together. Oh, and I do want to mention that Roald Helgeson is also online, and he is with Tlingit and Haida if there are any questions. So I guess I will pause there and see if the body has questions.
Questions from the Assembly? Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I just had a question actually on a slight difference between the two MOAs on the points of contact. On the, I believe it's the solid waste one, there is a specific person named as a point of contact, and on the public safety one, there isn't. Is there a reason for that difference?
Madam Manager.
The reason for that is I had the name of our contact with Tlingit and Haida and added that right before packet. So maybe more appropriate just to have a position. We can certainly do that, but that was just my last minute, I think, addition.
Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. On the Lands Committee back in July, we did give direction to do a request for proposals regarding composting. Do we expect the memorandum of agreement regarding solid waste to in any way impact that request for proposals?
So at the, I believe it was Public Works and Facilities Committee in July, you made a motion to issue a RFP for composting. And just to backtrack a little bit where we are with composting, we have a $2.5 million grant to develop a portion of the old gravel pit behind Home Depot for composting. That amount of funding, because it's an undeveloped parcel, will, provide utilities and access and site development, but no facilities. The Assembly's also appropriated funds to do a zero waste kind of subdivision there, so some planning funds to do zero waste planning. You've also supported a waste characterization study and other elements of kind of a longer term vision that we're working towards waste diversion. And certainly composting is part of that, but not the only part of that and that vision. Tlingit and Haida also has a vision of waste diversion. They have received grant funding for composting, I believe 3 separate grants for composting. They have staff that works on that. And they also want to look at recycling and other measures. So you'll notice in the memo, they've received upwards of $15 million in grant funding regionally to work on these issues. So, this memorandum of agreement is not saying we're going to do X or we're going to do Y with CBJ's $2.5 million for composting. That will still require, assembly process. But it's saying we are going to work with Tlingit and Haida on that effort, because if they have, I think $4 million for composting and we have $2.5 million for composting, we should be talking to each other and we should be planning and engaging in those conversations.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Along Mr. Kelly's question, even if we're working together, I liked your analogy there, it still opens it up to private people too, or other entities that might be interested in composting, correct?
Yeah, I think it would be the nature of that, what that relationship looks like. So, and I we haven't had those conversations. Clinka and Haida have not had those conversations with CBJ. They have said, hey, we're interested in leveraging you have land you're dedicating to waste diversion, and we want to work with that. So you're right, there is nothing about this memorandum that excludes working with private businesses like we do with our other waste diversion, like CBJ does with our other waste diversion.
Very good. See no further, Madam Mayor.
I just wanted to thank everybody that worked on this. It's taken a little time because COVID kind of screwed everything up, but I appreciate everybody's effort in doing the memorandum agreement with the tribe.
Yeah, echo that. Appreciate our relationship and look forward to continuing these government-to-government relationships and conversations with our sovereign tribal government, and also hopeful for good synergy with them and as well as local composting businesses. Madam Mayor, do you have a motion?
I move to forward the memorandums of agreement to the full assembly for consideration
Very good.
and ask for unanimous consent.
Seeing no objection, though, that motion is approved. Our last agenda topic. Oh yeah, we have a staff report, but our last agenda topic is an update on sheltering of unhoused population. Mr. Barr.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Smith. So the last time the body discussed this topic was in July. Before that, you also talked about it in June and April, so a series of conversations. And some of you will recall that we were really struggling with the reality that we were unable to find a good location for a summer campground at those meetings. And you collectively asked for an update on how things went at the end of the season. So I wanted to offer a little bit of information about what happened over the summer, as well as summarize a couple of other discussion points that we've had in the recent past. So at the July meeting, that was post-Grants Pass. The June meeting was pre-Grants Pass, just to kind of orient you to the Supreme Court decision that was kind of critical there. And at that July meeting, we discussed the impact that Supreme Court decision would have on CBJ code and what that might look like, what we thought that would look like from an enforcement perspective. When it comes to camping on public property. And I'll distinguish between camping on public property and camping on private property. Nothing really about the Supreme Court decision changed anything about enforcement on private property. It was, by and large, focused on public. Generally speaking, since then, our enforcement activity has been pretty limited. We have been pretty sensitive, I would say, to the changing legal landscape and people becoming familiar with that landscape. And all of the enforcement activity that has happened over the past couple of months has really been has been pre-approved and conducted by high-level CBJ employees. The police chief, the deputy police chief have actively been in the field doing enforcement themselves. They consult with me before they do it. Same with the Parks and Rec director. It's not something that we're doing lightly. And I would say that there have been two categories of enforcement that has taken place over the past couple of months. One is when there is a specific individual who, for whatever reason, is acting out and disrupting use of a specific facility or other individuals in that area. That type of enforcement has happened twice, both times at Marine Park. Over the summer, and the other category is when any given campsite grows to a size to the point where the individual campers that were attempting to manage or mitigate the impacts of that campsite could no longer do so just because of the sheer number of people. And I do think it's important to note that we saw when we think about number of people and impact, it's fair to say that we saw a disproportionate correlation between the number of people and the impact. So to put that in a different way, small number of people, small campsites, low impact. As those campsites grow, it's not a linear relationship between number of people and impact. It's more, I don't know if exponential is fair. We don't have data on this, but it's, the impacts accumulate faster than you would expect if you were just talking about number of folks. And enforcement in that category was criteria driven. The criteria that we were looking at were unmitigated human waste, lots of garbage not being cared for, evidence of increased criminal activity, presence of stolen property, reports from surrounding neighbors, businesses, primarily of potential criminal activity. And we took enforcement in that category twice, both on public property near the Teal Street area. There's been other enforcement actions on private property that really hasn't changed year over year. I think it's important to acknowledge that this topic continues to be really complex and difficult. I've been to conferences this year, other CBJ staff have been to conferences this year. When we go to sessions on this topic, it has not been uncommon in my experience for the session presenters to say something along the lines of, if you came for solutions, you're in the wrong place. Like, this is a really hard problem that every municipality is struggling with, and that are dealing with and trying to address this particular struggle in lots of different ways. But no one has a silver bullet. I think that's fair. And I would also note that when I talk with our police department, so recognizing that a completely different group of people felt the impact of summer camping. Not completely different, because the people who are camping felt the impact that they're struggling with same year over year. But the geographic impact was different this year, right? It was more in the valley, more in the Teal Street area, not in the Thane area, not in the Mill Street area. And recognizing that when I look at when I talk to the police department and kind of get their sense, and again, the data is not really thorough and excellent here about, which summer was better, which summer did we struggle more with. There's a strong internal consensus among CBJ staff that we struggled more with the campground in the Mill Street area and the impacts we were seeing there than we struggled with this year. So that's what I wanted to convey to you on the camping piece. I also wanted to just briefly mention that the cold weather shelter is stood up. St. Vincent de Paul is our contractor this year. They opened as scheduled on October 15th. They have largely new staff operating the shelter this year as compared to last year, but they did lots of training, and many of the staff that they've hired are familiar with the operations from being former residents who are now housed in Juneau otherwise. We are running a little bit higher numbers, not much, but a little bit higher numbers year to year. We like last year, this year we started low in the low 30s, and if we follow the trend that we saw last year, that number will increase over time as temperatures drop. Hasn't been all great. There has been one trespass so far from an assault. There has been some vandalism. St. Vincent's has done, from my perspective, a very good job so far of communicating both with me, with JPD, CCFR, and surrounding businesses in the Thane kind of neighborhood area. So I'm confident in their ability to manage and appreciate appreciate the work that they're doing, because it is challenging work. So I think that's all I have for you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure I understand or reiterate what I heard. Make sure the piece around Grants Pass is right. We did do enforcement activities after Grants Pass that we wouldn't have done had that case been decided differently, but they were done with extreme consideration, and it was 5 times or less, or in that number?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I just had a question more about the cold weather shelter. At this point, we're just getting started. Temperatures aren't that extreme, so I imagine we're not approaching capacity. But do we have any concerns about reaching capacity during a colder during a more colder event, or have we done anything to increase capacity this year compared to last year?
Thank you for that question, Assemblymember Kelly. Could you repeat just the last sentence and a half? I missed just that last bit.
Sure. I'm sorry. Have we done anything within the last year that might have increased the capacity compared to last year?
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. We haven't done anything over the past year that will increase capacity. We did make improvements to the shelter itself over the past year. So we installed interior restrooms, which was definitely the highest need that we needed to do there. We're no longer using porta potties outside, so that's been good. I think it is. I at least am concerned that we might reach capacity in that space from 2 perspectives. One, from there's a physical capacity limit in Thane Warehouse, just the sheer number of cots that you can reasonably and safely fit in that space. And then there's the capacity of St. Vincent's to have enough staff to manage the environment and manage just an increased number of people in that space. If push comes to shove, we can. It won't be easy, but we can move more things out of Thane Warehouse and expand the portion of the warehouse that is currently used for the shelter. But that won't necessarily address the staff side capacity.
Mr. Bryson.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, I have information from the last community meeting that regarded this. Do you care if I give a little bit of testimony, or do I have to keep it to a question?
Sure, go ahead, let us know.
Last Monday or Tuesday, the beginning of the month, the Glory Hall new executive director is hosting a community meeting for businesses that are in the valley to come, and we're dealing with this issue. They're definitely discussing trespassing and doing like joint trespassing, like they got trespass from me and they got trespass from you, and communicating that information. The one important piece that we're talking about right now is that when the warming shelter did open, that the crime rate did tick down in the valley. And we started talking about that, and one of the kinds of crimes that was occurring in the valley is people trying to secure shelter. So 50 degrees and blowing rain might not be freezing, but that's when vandalism and the van break-ins and a lot of the crime that Lieutenant Wesky was referring to was people trying to get out of the elements. And having the warming shelter open up absolutely helped that problem enough where it was noteworthy that you could say that, yes, crime in the valley is ticking down. With that being said, I would as strongly oppose a summer campground because of all the crime that operated out of an unsupervised campground. However, knowing that a supervised warehouse shelter of sleeping did lower the crime because people were then not having to commit a crime to have a place to sleep. once that information was coming out of that safety meeting, I wanted to bring it to you guys because that would be something that I'd like for us to look at in the spring. I would not be in favor of any level of campground, but if there's a way that we could continue funding the warehouse cot style shelter, we could be at least lowering the crime rate and could be attacking the homelessness without having to be as combative on the crime. I do want to remind this group that the very first night that the warming shelter was closed this summer, one of my business was burglarized by a recipient or a person who'd been camping there or staying at the warming shelter, and it happened a second time this summer, and both times they were arrested in the valley in that area. So there is a crime element that is taking place in the valley. They did have some measured relief of campgrounds. There had been a really large campground on the corner of Teal Street. They worked with a person. That very large campground is now gone. And so there were some measured success of getting the people from those very problematic campgrounds into more of the out of the way campgrounds. And again, we heard the stories when they got too big. Mr. Chair, I won't take any more of the time, but that was seeing the impact of having a shelter for people to sleep and the impact that it had on the crime rate overnight was something that this assembly should really be discussing or be aware of. Thank you for the time.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Atkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Mr. Barr, thank you for the update. It's good to kind of look back on it after all the discussions we've had. I actually did want to kind of follow up on what Mr. Bryson was talking about a summer campground versus dispersed camping. And you're talking about the data we have, it is better on city staff this year, at least, to have dispersed camping. But I know in the past we've talked about the mill campground and a lot of the problems and how it really wasn't an ideal location for access to services and enforcement and that kind of thing. I guess, in your opinion, I know that site does not exist now, but if there were to ever in the future be a site that's more suitable for a summer campground, do you think it'd be worth giving it a shot, or are we in a position where we kind of want to write off summer campgrounds altogether?
Thank you for the question, Assemblymember Atkinson. You know, one of the at the end of the season last year, I explored with St. Vincent's whether or not it would be an option for St. Vincent's to continue to operate the cold weather shelter just outside of the cold weather season, because I think that that model, while certainly challenging and not easy for St. Vincent's from an operational perspective, works to a degree. So at the time, they were not able to just from an organizational perspective do it for more than 6 months out of the year. They needed they had staff that were turning over. They needed to focus on other priorities, other aspects of their mission. I would, if that is an option in the future, and it may, I'm not sure if it is or not. Those are conversations we can have. I think that's a relatively proven model. I am skeptical that an unsupervised campground anywhere in the borough would be either possible or effective, and there's nuance on both of those angles, possible from a political perspective and effective in general from a benefit to the campers and the surrounding community perspective.
Any further questions from the Assembly? Ms. Hall.
Knowing that our temperatures have been pretty mild this fall, and and we're already at about 35 to 40 people per night, I think it would be prudent to begin planning to be able to expand the warehouse space if it's a matter of moving furniture out, because that would be helpful for the operators. And also like to remind the Assembly that 28 additional beds will be coming open in the Forget-Me-Not Manor this spring as the cold weather shelter would be winding down. and agree that supervised, be it a campground or extension of the cold weather shelter, would be essential, but maybe some more creative solutions can be worked out if the 28 additional beds help. And yeah, additional space at the Glory Hall, perhaps. I don't know. Mr. Bryson might be able to speak to that, but thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Seeing no further questions from the Assembly on this topic, thank you for the update, Mr. Barr. Next, we have staff reports, 2025 CBJ meeting calendar. Let's see. I noticed a few things. I know it is quite a juggling act trying to deal with holidays and conferences and school breaks and everything else. So, Madam Clerk, thank you for trying to put that all together. But yes, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, and again, echo what you just said. Thank you, Madam Clerk. It's tough to do, but we looked at it this morning, and I first asked Madam Clerk to change the color of June 9th and October 27th, just because so you know that they're just assembly meetings, but they are a special type of assembly meeting, but they are assembly meetings. And then we looked at potentially, with the will of the body, removing June 30th cow and July 7th assembly meeting. We thought we had had plenty of meetings and we were actually one over than we typically are. So we thought that would be a good place to remove if people don't object to that. And then in December, we moved the cow from the 1st of December, so we don't end up with a situation like we did this year where you have Committee of the Whole, Finance on Wednesday, retreat on Saturday, December 6th, Mr. Kelly, and then go straight to AML. So we moved it to the 22nd, and we're hoping that we don't have to have it that day, but that's where we moved it, but open to suggestions on that one, just so there's a cow somewhere in December.
Are these,
Yeah.
I'm looking at that doesn't correspond to this. Are these like verbal things I should be scribbling frantically?
Well, I'm just asking, these are what we talked about this morning, and if nobody has objection, then we will probably go with that. But if you.
I didn't even.
Would
I
you
was
like
so
those
lost
meetings?
after the first
We can
one.
certainly go one by one.
No, I mean, generally, I don't want more
Yeah.
meetings, so
Yeah.
I'm sure
Does
they're
any-
fine.
Does anybody object for removing June 30th cow and July 7th assembly meeting? Okay.
Wait, let me kick over to the Madam Clerk really quickly before we make a decision. Madam Clerk.
Thank you. And Madam Mayor, while I appreciate the fact that folks do want a break at that time, you're just coming off of finance, and if you have anything you want to go on the ballot, that July 7th is the last regular meeting to introduce something to go on the ballot, and July 28th is the last regular meeting to adopt something for the ballot. So that's the key reason you want to have that meeting stay on if possible. If you want to move it to June 30th and get rid of the cow on the 30th, that's an option. But you don't want necessarily between June 9th being the last opportunity to introduce a ballot option and July 28th as being the last opportunity to adopt a ballot option.
Well, as one of my staff members said this morning, it's easier to remove them and call a special assembly meeting than it is to have them on the calendar.
It's easier to remove?
No, it's easier
Easier
to
to
remove them
have.
from the calendar and call it a special assembly
Should we
meeting.
need to?
Because if they're on the calendar, you know they'll get filled.
Yeah, I said cut that out, and then we'll call it if we need it.
Thank you for the insights on the July 7th regular assembly meeting, or the need for an assembly meeting before the July 28th meeting.
It's up
Let's
to,
see.
it's up to
Yeah.
the assembly. I'm looking for feedback.
Are,
We're looking
yep.
for feedback.
I think some options that we presented, the mayor listed a number of changes. I think the main one was the removal of the June 30th and the June 30th cow and the July 7th regular meeting. An option was also to move the July 7th regular meeting to June 30th. Madam Clerk.
And if I might throw one more kink into the whole fun, this is also July, June timeframe is when you meet as the full assembly as the HRC to interview for the docks and harbors, the airport, and the Eagle Crest boards. So regardless of what you come up with your standing dates, you are going to be having special meetings for those events to take place in June as well as December.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. If we're removing the 30th cow, would that automatically mean that we're canceling the 30th lands? Or would the intention be that we still have a 1 hour thing?
That's a good question. I will say that I looked at the 2024 calendar, and by my count, I saw 11 instances of Public Works, lands, cow. On this calendar, I count 13. Again, I'm not, someone can double check my math, but I do believe there are more of those meetings scheduled or proposed on this calendar. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, and I think this might touch on that point a little bit. I am noticing that there are 2 cow meetings in June. I think I would be happy with moving the July 7th Assembly meeting to June 30th and canceling the cow and the other meetings that would be associated with the cow.
That is one option. Let's see. Who would like to cancel both of those meetings? There is a majority. Those meetings will be removed, and we will likely need to schedule something in there, and hopefully with plenty of notice, but those meetings have been removed.
Ms. Atkinson will have to schedule a human resources, and if we have to tack on a special assembly, we certainly can do that.
Yes. And Ms. Atkinson, you'll be the bad guy when you have to do those, by the way. We have to schedule that, it's on you. Let's see. Madam Clerk, or Madam Mayor, anything else?
Okay, so, and then December, like I said, we removed the, it's already been done, but we took the cow from December 1st and moved it to the 22nd. Just everybody's thoughts on that. I mean, we could move it as late as the 29th, but then that makes it, it's right before New Year's. So we didn't know if people were vacationing or you wanted a meeting that close to Christmas. So just looking for feedback on that one.
Ms. Wall.
I'd prefer to leave it as we usually do, but between the options of having a lot of meetings before our retreat or right before
Christmas.
time many of us take off, that would be my choice.
So that would be to put it back at December 1st. And I know that was maybe just a request of staff, just because, I mean, are we doing that this year?
This year, we are trying to consolidate the Finance Committee and the Committee of the Whole on the Monday, the 1st, and we haven't quite successfully pulled that off. But just looking at, you guys having Monday evening meeting, Wednesday evening meeting, all-day meeting Saturday, getting on a plane on Sunday.
We'll let that one stew for a second. Mr. Kelly? Did you have anything?
I think I'm aligned with what I think I'm hearing from Ms. Wool, that we move the 22nd back to the 1st, just because I am planning to be abroad at that time, so it'd be nice to not have to zoom into that meeting.
Very good. Planning ahead. Madam Mayor.
And we can certainly do that, and we can end up doing what we're doing this year is trying to combine them so we're not slamming. So.
That was hard for you to hear. Madam Mayor just said that we may try to do it as we did this year, which is try to consolidate. And we can see how this year goes, and if it's just not workable, we can make an amendment to this calendar later. So, okay. Is there alignment on moving the 22nd Committee of the Whole to December 1st? Very good. Madam Mayor.
And then lastly, on the second page, the reorganization meeting is on 10/27. That's just a typo.
Yes, thank you. those were the notes I had. I also wanted to just flag for everyone, and especially our new assembly members, a couple key dates. It looks like April 5th is going to be that big finance meeting that we did this last year. I will say that being remote was challenging, speaking from experience, so do flag that one early. A benefit is that we may be able to cancel one or two of the Wednesday meetings, so it kind of consolidates, though it is a Saturday. Also, please note that the December 6th retreat is set early in advance, so please note that in your calendars. The last thing I wanted to flag was the joint meeting with our state legislative delegation and the DC and Alaska lobbyists. That looks like it's on the Wednesday of the first week of session. Anyway, I would just maybe say before we finalize that, we should check with our delegation. I think in the past it was in the second week. Just from my time in the legislature, that was just a very busy week, especially on a new legislature with this year it is. So anyway. Ms. Atkinson.
I was just going to agree with you, especially with potentially a House still organizing at that time. That will make it very difficult for Representatives Hennen and Story to leave the building at all. So I would be cautious about that one.
Okay, maybe we can leave that one a little more dynamic and look to schedule as it gets a little closer or something. So.
That's why it's just in pale yellow.
No, it's not. It's this one.
Says 10/21.
Oh, God.
Okay. Miss Candies.
Thanks. The reorganization meeting, you flagged that just now or no? A moment ago?
I believe it was just noted as the 22nd when it, I think, should have just been noted as the 27th.
27th.
It is, shown on the calendar in the correct color, but it is, the 27th of October. So just a typo there.
I was going to share in that case, is there a reason that we aren't looking to any of the November Saturdays for a reorg?
Or for a retreat.
Or, yeah, for a retreat, sorry.
Madam Clerk.
For reorg or retreat? The
Retreat,
reorg is
madam.
dictated by the
Right.
charter. So if it's
Retreat.
reorg, no problem. Retreat is up to these guys.
Madam Manager.
Yeah, really, we need time to be able to prepare accurate projections for you to be able to talk about the budget, which is the main topic at the retreat. So we're trying to kind of hit that sweet spot. So it'd be difficult for us to get you the information that you need to give us direction earlier in November.
Miss Candies.
Yeah, I would imagine that would be the case if it was early November. I was just looking at all the Saturdays and I'm thinking the 29th might be similar to the 6th and deconflicts it. But.
It is just the day after it's the day after the Thanksgiving weekend.
Oh, we all care about different things.
So good hunting. Any other changes? Madam?
What would be most convenient for staff is if AML was moved back to the last week in November.
Very good. I think we have found alignment on changes to the calendar, and do we need to adopt it or see it again, or can we just adopt it with those changes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will revise and come up with draft 5 for final approval at your next assembly meeting. And that will be in the packet for the 18th for final approval.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Draft 5. Okay. Yeah, version 5. Okay, we will see this again on November 18th. That gets us through staff reports. Our next meeting date is December 2nd at 6 p.m. Seeing no other business for the committee of the whole, we are adjourned.